My name is Prof Sorrentino, and I'm a professor of political science, and I'm the moderator of the chapter. What I want to talk about today is the notion of stereotypes in the media, particularly as it relates to Italian Americans. And I thought I'd begin with a couple of observations. I came across this little diddly earlier. It says that in heaven, all the chefs are French, all the police are English, all the lovers Italian, and it's all organized by the Germans. In hell, all the chefs are English, all the police are French, all the lovers are German, and it's all organized by the Italians. Now, that is what we sometimes call an equal opportunity stereotype. But what I'm going to suggest is that in most instances, it is not fair. It is not equal. Most Italians and Italian Americans are represented as bigots, bandits, and buffoons. And very much tied to this whole notion is this image of Italian Americans as somehow being more inclined to organize crime. What I want to do is to just give some statistics. A recent Zogby poll of American teenagers 13 to 18 revealed that 78% associate Italian Americans with criminal activity. An earlier poll by the Princeton-based response analysis revealed that 74% of adults believe that most Italians have some connection to organized crime. Now, this has serious consequences, and these consequences have to be understood in terms of how most people receive their information. There is a great column referred to, "It's Only a Movie." But I'd like to point out that a lot of things that happen in the press, happen in the public culture, are actually very much reinforcing this theme. Let me give you an example here. Referring to Supreme Court Justices Antonin Scalia and Sam Alito in his song "A Few Words in Defense of Our Country," Randy Newman sings, "You know it pisses me off a little that this Supreme Court is going to outlive me. But I defy you anywhere in the world to find me two Italians as tight-ass as the two Italians we got." Interesting. Let me refer you to what is sometimes called the bigot of Belmar. In his July 4th edition of a free newsletter, Kenneth E. Pringle, the mayor of the seaside town of Belmar, New Jersey, offers constituents his take. The Guidos who show up tan to the color of coconut shells and hairsprayed Staten Island girls who fight with brass knuckles and straight razors. Okay, this was meant to be tongue-in-cheek, he says. We certainly can go to Denny's restaurant, and they're featuring a Tony Sirico, Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos, complaining about fast food breakfast, proof that a fictitious violent character has become a pseudo-spokesman for Italian Americans. And we can go on and on. One obviously knows that one can find in commercials numerous examples of how Italians are viewed as gangsters or as crude. Let me give you an example here. Uncle Ben's pasta bowl, all right? If you eat Uncle Ben's pasta bowl, the ad reads, don't be surprised if you start to talk like this afterwards. Or a Budweiser beer commercial. Several swarthy Italian men in an Italian restaurant ask each other, how you doing? Did you take care of that thing? We can go on. Here's a situation where we have the International Dairy Food TV commercial. Four heavy, dark young men wearing gold chains menace a group of senior citizens in the diner. The elderly men rout the bullies because milks make them strong. The concept of Italians as gangsters, Italians as members of organized crime, is so reinforced in the contemporary culture. And that one has to ask ourselves, how did this come about? What are the forces that helped to create it? When I was growing up, one of the great TV shows was The Untouchables, Week after week, the program regaled the American public with the thrills of Elliot Ness and his team of G-men, cracking down on an endless army of gangsters, practically all of which had Italian names. The program was a variation on the prototype of Cops and Robbers. It was commonly referred to as Cops and Wops. I remember being angry. I remember being frustrated. And I remember that the Italian Americans that I had known in my own family did not resemble this in the least. I understood that they were hardworking, in many instances extremely hardworking. My father worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, he had to go into his business to clean, all right? In the end, when he retired, and that's 20 years ago, so it is a bit dated, his top salary was $16,000 a year. The idea that Italians were all gangsters, I certainly didn't know any, and all of my family, we didn't know any. And what I always found was so fascinating was that the way the public had seen us, the way the public understood us, and the notion that a few gangsters, all right, we're going to replace the hardworking, dedicated individuals. In fact, according to the FBI, there are only 5,000 gangsters in the United States. Of those 5,000, less than 30% have Italian surnames. They represent 0.0025 of the 26 million Americans of Italian descent. But how could the public see this? Well, I'm going to go and look at the history and the geography. And if one understands the history and geography, one will have a better understanding of how this became associated. What we find is that the geography of Italy is unique, all right? Italy is about the size of Arizona, all right? But 80% of Italy is mountainous, all right? And there are essentially no navigable rivers, all right, in the south of Italy. What we have is isolation from these mountains as well. With the mountains jettisoning almost to the sea, what we find is that communities in Italy are virtually isolated without any communication, develop a separate dialect or language, and as a result, are isolated from the rest of the world. We know that the climate also contributes to this. There are long rains, all right, with then having droughts. And usually what this results in is large pools of water leading to malaria. What we also find is that in Italy, it is seismically active. There are earthquakes continuously. There are volcanic actions that are part of the Italian seismic situation. What am I trying to suggest here? I'm trying to suggest that Italy is a poor country in terms of having natural resources. There is virtually no coal, no steel. It is a country that existed for many, many years under foreign occupation. Once we move away from Rome, and Rome is defeated in 476, but even if you look at that, southern Italy, where 90% of Italian Americans originate, was mostly under a Greek culture. We refer to it as a Magna Graecia, right? The people spoke Greek during most of this time period. They had a different sensibility. Their view of the Roman Empire was not as part of their own destiny, but as another foreign occupation. These small little communities, isolated by dialect, isolated by geography, isolated by natural resources, created a community that viewed itself as more a victim and more as dependent upon the forces of nature. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Italy. And the history of Italy is a very, very important one to understand, because when we look at Italy, it is also in the middle of the Mediterranean. And the middle of the Mediterranean means that when major countries of the world wanted to engage in navigation, in trade, in defense, Italy became a strategic port, a strategic place in which one had to control if they were going to control their livelihoods. If we go to Edward Gibbons, all right, in his famous work, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, he says the blood of nations was mingled into 1,000 channels. The various rebellions and uprisings in the South were all brutally crushed because of the fragmentation of region, language, and geography. This, coupled with fighting against large armies and weapons of a nation such as France, Spain, or Austria, what we find is that direct confrontation from these people was foolhardy. Life was unfair. Justice was an abstraction and a myth.